So I'm at the San Francisco Botanical Gardens, and that's the entrance, the great entrance cypress tree. It's really amazing. And this is a big walnut tree, and these are the Atlas cedars that I love, that live here. And I'm today about light. Of course, I'm very often thinking about things like light and time and space and, origin and incarnation, matter, all these things. But I'm thinking today about light in a variety of different ways. Now, in each language, there's a different, unique word for light. I don't know them all. I would like to know them all. I bet they share some quality that we could learn to recognize. Although, surely in some languages that quality would be very subtle. Huh? In English, and I suspect in many other languages, the word light is used to analogize all kinds of things. We would say, for example, that somebody with a really nice smile has a bright smile. And we might say that there's light in the eyes of living beings that we can sense. And of course, a different sense of the word is not heavy, right? It's not heavy, it's light. So in English, there's a lot of analogies for light. We might say, for example, that a particularly intelligent person is bright, but we might also mean that person is spirited. So that light has analogies with vitality, intelligence, spiritedness, playfulness, and many others that we could catalog. Now, as you can see, today is not particularly, let's try this. It's not particularly bright, right? Today is a relatively gray day here in San Francisco, although the clouds are backlit by the sun. And the sun around here is crucially important. Obviously, without light, we might have other senses, but we would certainly not have vision. And of course, what is meant by light isn't only the light that we see, but it's what science has termed the spectrum of electromagnetic radiation. Oh, here's a really nice mushroom bloom at the base of what I think is some kind of fir tree. Yeah, these are great big mushrooms. I don't know what kind they are, but it's a nice little bloom. So, in previous recent talks, I spoke about how the material world can be imagined as a projection of qualities from a transcendental order of being, which I sometimes call origin, just to have a very simple way of talking about it. Origin meaning that dimension, that living dimension from which all things acquire their properties or character. And around here in material existence, light is a profound aspect of the expression of that potential. And the marriage of light and water is something I talk about very regularly, and I'm fascinated, entranced by, enchanted by. But the thing that I wanted to talk about today is that aspect of that we might think of as the metalog, the source in a transcendental domain of light that we experience here in the physical world, in our incarnation, in matter. I think Sting once, when he was with the Police, wrote a song called Invisible Sun, in which he says there has to be an invisible sun. And though I don't know the lyrics perfectly, it goes something like that gives its light to everyone. But I think there's something more profound going on even than that, although that's an important idea, and hearing that stated poetically was an important moment for my development. Because there are many things in our human experience and existence that we have awareness of, but that awareness maybe has not yet become conscious, and so it has not yet become conceptualized or transmittable in language. And so when I heard that, I don't know, I was maybe 17 or something when I first heard that. It really had a significant impact on me. It's the kind of thing where something deep inside me said, yes, there has to be an invisible sun. Something that the sun, the physical sun, is our expression of, or is the local expression of. And maybe that sun is the analogous light that we see in each other's eyes, in each other's visages, that we see in the play of children, that we see sparkling in the reflections of moving water. There's on Earth, in our incarnate experience, there are essentially we have experience of three kinds of light. I mean, we could, make further discriminations, but for my purposes, these three will suffice. The first is sunlight, which is really interesting in that it imbues the world with color. Color comes into our experience primarily due to sunlight. And sunlight is a bit declarative in that it tells us the shape and form and color of things in a very direct way. The things you can see around me, the shape of my face, it's all very distinct. You don't have to doubt that you're looking at me or my eyes. It's not suggesting that Darren's face is here, right? It's declaring. It's asserting. And I think our waking intelligence is a lot like that. It likes assertions, it likes declarations, it's interested and confused in relation to what we refer to as truth. So I think our waking minds are a lot like the activity of sunlight in our waking lives. if you look around me at the moment, right, all of this is quite clear. The sunlight doesn't tell us what things are, but it does reveal in great and stunning detail their shapes, where they begin, where they end, shades, color. And even in dim sunlight, which we have today, all of these things are pretty obvious in sunlight. Now, one of the other kinds of light that we experience, hopefully, although these days it's a bit harder to experience that directly, is moonlight. And moonlight is quite different from sunlight. Moonlight does not so easily declare the shape or form or colors of things. And in fact, in moonlight, color is largely replaced by grays, shades of gray. And form and shape are suggested rather than declared, so that in moonlight, a sweep of branches can appear to be an animal or a bird, or the figures that we see around us start to take on a more dreamlike quality. And of course, at night we dream. Not that it's impossible for us to dream in the daytime. I've had this experience. In fact, thankfully, I've had it recently while taking a dip in Lake Arrowhead. So we have sunlight, which is very crisp and declarative and is the source of color. We have moonlight, which is dim, the source of grays. Things blend together, and our imagination is invited into direct expression because what we see is less complete. And rather than being declared the way that sunlight does, it is suggested. There's a suggestion of a tree over there. Is it a tree? Is it a bush? I'm not sure. What is it? What is that, right? So in moonlight, identity changes. The nature of our relationship with identity changes because the nature of our relationship with light has changed. And this is really fascinating to me. Now, the other two kinds of light, although I started out mentioning three, so that would mean there's one more, but I'll mention two others. So the first kind is starlight, which is quite profound but has very little effect on what we can see down here on Earth because it doesn't generate enough light in most circumstances to affect our vision. But it's something that we can see in the sky that's very profound and beautiful. And I think very important. What's going on up there in what we refer to as outer space is fundamentally intimate with everything that we observe here on Earth. Because all of the things that we see here they are almost like crystallizations, they could be thought of as crystallizations of qualities in outer space or time space. Here's another interesting little mushroom bloom. It's been very moist here lately, so there's a lot of fungal activity, and there's probably a huge mat underneath the ground that these mushrooms are the flowering bodies of. I'm going to walk over here to say hi to a tree that belongs, that doesn't belong, but is a heart friend of one of my friends. So there's sunlight. We know of sunlight, we know of moonlight. Direct from our experience, we would know these things without science as long as we had eyes. And even if we didn't have eyes, we would know something of the sun because we would feel it on our skin and our faces. And of course we have the scientific, concepts and models of electromagnetic radiation. But that's a very different thing from what I want to speak about at the moment. Now, of course, when I first began my discussion, I mentioned there are three kinds of light we're familiar with. Physical light, anyway. Sunlight, moonlight, and of course the light that's bringing my image to you now, electronic light. And it's hard to imagine. This is a tree that me and my friend West spent some time with when he was visiting me. In Latin, it's a Cupressus macrocarpa. In English, it's a Monterey cypress. And it's huge and beautiful and damp at the moment. So we also experience electronic light, and for all that technological development has given us some liberty and freedom and convenience, those things come with prices. And probably not too many people are aware of this, but when they were first introduced, there was a staggering backlash against electronic light. Some people saw it as a wonder, but many people saw it as a curse. And people who had wisdom said, where will this lead? And it's an important question because we're losing our experience of the nighttime sky. Having nocturnal electronic light disturbs the biorhythms of all of life on Earth, including humans. And recently I saw an article that claimed that the massive die-off in many insect populations that is presently going on Earth is partly caused by light. Recently in my neighborhood, the street lights were changed from incandescent, which produced a sort of warm golden glow, to LEDs, which produce a clinical, visually disturbing white glow that actually seems to kind of vibrate in a bad way to me somehow. And that was a really disturbing transition that I can't really affect, but has changed my experience of being outside at night. So we have these three primary kinds of light that we experience, although there used to be a different form of common artificial light, which was the light produced by burning things or candles. And that's a kind of golden light, the light of fire, right? Which the electronic light is a strange derivation of. But rather than speak much about artificial light, I want to return to the two kinds of light that are common to our ordinary animalian experience, sunlight and moonlight. And one of the things that occurred to me is that if there is something like an invisible sun, say the source of being, right, the origin of our being, of our minds, of our hearts, of our emotions, that our minds and hearts and emotions are expressions of a relationship with this invisible sun, so to speak, or origin light. And I'm not asking us to believe anything here. I'm not saying, oh, here's some metaphysical model you should believe. That's not at all what I'm doing. I'm rather suggesting a perspective that I find fascinating and somewhat enlightening to play with, right? To consider, to think with, to think about, without having to believe any particular model or metaphysic. And the other day, as I was making a live video at the lake with the tree and the water and the reflections, and talking about how perhaps material reality is a peculiar form of reflection in matter of something that's going on in a universe beyond matter. So that all of the shapes and forms and relationships and characters and qualities of material and organismal existence are expressions of goings on in a transcendental plane. Now, it's possible that the the opposite relationship obtains, which would be that the forms and relationships and activities and qualities and characteristics of the material world inform a transcendental dimension. And if I think carefully about this idea, which I think is relatively radical, even though it's not that hard to imagine or think up, it seems likely that both things are going on, right? So the material world is at once the living sort of material reflection of a transcendental world, and what happens here informs the character and organization and perhaps spirit of that transcendental world as well. So if we think that there is a thing like the sun in a transcendental dimension, of which the sun here is a physical expression, right? Then we might imagine that over time there has been something like weather, right? There's been something analogous to the fact that right now the sky is gray. Yeah? I can't see the sun. Now, if the sky had been gray every day since I was born, and if no other people were talking to me, I might not know there was a sun. There would be light all the time. But if the sky were gray for every day, well, I mean, certainly children are born in gray times. And it could be weeks or months, in some unlikely cases, years before a human child ever sees the sun. And of course, some people are born blind. Some tiny percentage of those people might regain their sight and see the sun for the first time and realize, oh my, there's this astonishing feature of reality that's been hidden from me all this time. And so I wonder if, like these children, we have always been in the influence of an invisible sun, but have rarely glimpsed it and have not been encouraged to imagine it, though we're encouraged to imagine other strange transcendental things, particularly like angry gods and stuff like that, which is a little bizarre, because I mean, if you were an infinite being, omnipresent and omnipotent, do you think you'd run around like a child having a tantrum, accusing and blaming and threatening? It just doesn't seem very likely to me. Like you'd probably be ecstatic most of the time, and I doubt it would even be possible to consider the things that might somehow enrage a deity. But in any case, back to this, the idea of weather. So if we think of human history as a very brief moment rather than a very long moment, if we think of the history of our species, let's say, going back to the time when the first glimpses of representational cognition, by which I mean the capacity to use language and to understand concepts and to have models of things formally in mind. If we go back just before about that time, and we look at the entire history of humans from that time till this time as, say, I don't know, equivalent to a week or a month, right? There might have been sunny days. There might have been days in the history of our species where the light of origin was obvious, right? Where the thing that the sun is a material representation of in matter, where that origin, where that transcendental, more than a being, more than a thing, was obvious to everyone, and everyone could sense it and see it and feel its presence and have its light transform their seeing, their knowing, their souls. There may have been days that were bright, so bright that when the brightness went away, when the heavenly weather changed and it became dark, we humans established religions in remembrance of something that used to be an absolute part of our common experience, but disappeared behind something analogous to clouds as our cognitive and spiritual evolution proceeded. When you hear the birds, you know there are birds, though you cannot see them. But light does not make sound. So you cannot hear the light. It's something you have to perceive. With actual light, of course, we perceive it with our eyes, but it affects lots of things, right? It affects our skin. And when I think back about this idea that over time, the human experience of the light of origin has changed, has been through transformations in a way not dissimilar to how our experience of the sun changes. If I did not know there was a sun, I would not be able to tell there was by looking at the sky today. And so perhaps we live in a time where the light of origin, staggeringly profound to experience, is hidden and cannot be sensed directly. And I suspect that when it could, our hearts and souls danced with joy. But they may also have been terrified, because the very first time one sees the sun, it's not merely beautiful. For many of us anyway, it would not be merely beautiful. It's kind of scary. It looks like it could destroy everything. It's really big, really powerful. The source of light itself, right? It could be a god. It might be coming toward us, right? Maybe it could burn everything up. We don't know. So with really powerful phenomenon like the sun or the moon or earthquakes or floods or things like this, as beautiful as nature and origin are, they are also of a magnitude that can be incredibly overwhelming, right? I have had an experience in my lifetime that lasted for a long time, much longer than I expected, in which I sensed this light, this more than light, of which I'm painting pictures now. And the analogy of a gray day is quite profound, because if we look back in human history, we will find stories, particularly Babylonian stories, of the disappearance of the gods. And in fact, in many religions, there's this thread where something divine was always with us, and here's a broken piece of sage. Something divine was with us and then departed. We did not know why. We did not know why. And since we did not know why, like children, we made up stories. In some of those stories, the brightness went away because we were bad. The divine light of origin that was at some point in our history present to our experience and awareness disappeared behind clouds, and we might have decided that's because we were bad. Of course, I think most of us would agree that cloudy days that hide the sun don't happen because we are bad. Now they can. It's not impossible, right? We can change the atmosphere. We can be bad in such a way that the atmosphere changes, clouds up all the time, and we don't see the sun anymore. That's conceivable, as you know, as a species, but probably not as individuals. So I like to think that there is something analogous to a meta sun, something transcendental, that the sun that we're familiar with is a material expression of, and that over time our species has experienced something analogous to weather in our relationship with this transcendental light of living light of origin. And I guess when I say living, what I mean is more than merely a force. It's not simply a mechanical phenomenon. Right? And if we look all around us, though science has framed nature in terms of mechanics because this is what science is good at and does, it's very clear that that description or that explanation is entirely insufficient to capture the spirit in the eyes of a child or a grandmother or a raccoon or a blue jay or a cat or a dog, or even the spirit available to those who are sensitive enough to detect it in plants, in living places, in moving waters on which the light is dancing. So when I think of the history of our species and the very confusing questions that surround our religions, I am wont to suspect that we've experienced something like weather. Our distant ancestors, it's funny, when I went under this little bough, my machine made more brightness in the image. That's really funny. So it got darker for me while it got brighter on the camera. Peculiar. I'm fascinated by this this idea that over the history of the cognitive and relational evolution of our species, there has been weather. And we may have affected that weather. The onset of machines, the discovery, the sort of birth of science, these things changed our ideas, they changed our orientations, our perspectives. You can hear, probably in the background now, the noise from the machines nearby. So I suspect that some of what we did as a species transformed our relationship with that transcendental sun or star or light of origin, and maybe hid it from us much more thoroughly than would have been possible had we not had our species taken a different path, right? Oh, here's a beautiful beautiful red hawk on this limb. It's sharpening its beak. I wonder if, let's see. It's really hard to hold this still. I'm not used to it. It's even harder if you magnify it, right? Because then the little tremors of my hand become very significant. Yeah, it's a beautiful animal. Really gorgeous. So I wanted to share with you this toy, this idea that over human history there are days when there are epochs when the light of origin is more or less perceivable to our people, and there are times in which the analog of the sky that lies between us and this light of origin, that analog sky is cloudy, or perhaps we ourselves have clouded it, and we no longer sense the presence of this light that funds our own spirit, our emotions, our hearts, our intelligence, our creativity, and may even in character the activities of our societies, may contribute to the character of those activities. So if there's an invisible sun that everyone's heart is an expression of, right? This isn't just to say it gives us light. We might very well be those aspects of our inwardness that we refer to as our souls, might be the direct expressions of our filial, our family relationship with this invisible sun. And that over history there have been transformations in that relationship, and there continue to be. And then, of course, even within a single human life, right? We don't have to take the entire history of mankind or life on Earth. Even within a single human life, there is a time when the light of origin is near at hand, right? And though we do not recognize it, it moves us as children to play. It moves us to joy, to be silly, to be beautiful, to be very expressive, to be frightened, to be alone, to be confused, right? When it is missing, or when it's counterfeited by things in our culture that have no trustworthy essence, yeah? And yet are posed as sources of light. For example, we call famous people stars. This is another one of these weird analogies that it strikes me is unlikely to be entirely accidental, if indeed anything can be entirely accidental. So we have all this phony brightness, right? Including the electronic light, stuff that replaces, or even like our electronic lights at night produce the pollution that hides the stars of our sky. There's a similar kind of pollution in the domain of relation, where we would normally be aware of and celebrate together and embody the invisible sun that is the source of relational and original being. We've had many gray days lately, and I think that's part of what led me to wonder about what it would be like for a species like ours to have had many gray eons, yeah? Many gray millennia. So many that first the light of origin was obscured, then it was hidden, then it was lost completely, then we made religions about it, then some of us went looking to see if it were still accessible to us, and some of us found paths back toward it, and some of us found counterfeits, and some of our cultures founded counterfeits, like the electronic light that isn't alive, that is harmful to life in most of its activities and results, many of its origins. So I think there's been bad weather for a long time in that space that separates our souls and our hearts from their origin. And so, although we have many stories about an invisible sun there, very, very few of us have had the opportunity to relate directly with it, though its existence is in some way certain because our desire for relation emanates from that place and includes qualities of character and purpose and orientation that we've inherited from, because we can be said to emanate from this invisible sun. Our souls, our hearts, and perhaps our minds. And I wonder what would happen. I'm very curious. I think it would probably be really confusing and terrifying at this point, which is maybe part of why it doesn't happen. But if the clouds were suddenly to part and the light of origin were commonly available to human experience again, I'm very curious about what would happen in that circumstance, how the humans would respond. And certainly you can tell kind of what would happen just by watching what human beings do en masse in the circumstance we're in, where it's hidden. They make up stories about it. They sell each other stories about it. One person lays claim to it. Oh, I've seen the sun. Come follow me. But that sun belongs to everybody. It's an essential aspect. The the invisible light of being, of origin, the intelligence, the beauty, the love that are natural to us when the weather is good, when the light is available to our experience. They are always with us. It's just a question of, can we sustain them together when times are difficult, when the sun is hidden, when our people have forgotten it, when instead they have stories and war religions and bizarre, fashionable metaphysics. Because trust me, in the light of that sun, in the light of origin, all of those things would melt away to nothing. They would be obliterated by it. There would be no story capable of containing it, or even really pointing at it. Like, it is, in fact, transcendental. It's beyond all conception. It's beyond all stories. At least my personal and admittedly limited experience of this topic strongly suggests that all of those things are true. I saw on the way here a little girl with her father. I know their family. And the brightness that was pouring out of that child was really inspiring to me, and profound and beautiful, and made me realize there are places in our experience where that light still shines. There's a helicopter, very loud. Surprising how the noise of machines really dominates a context. A moment ago, it was mostly bird song. Now it's mostly engine. But the bird song will prevail again. May you have a chance, may you have the opportunity to discover whether there's something to this conjecture I present you with today. That there is an invisible sun, or something even better than a sun. That it's more than simply a being. That you have a direct and personal relationship with it. In fact, it may be that your own mind and heart are expressions of it, the way that color is an expression of light in the environment. I hope you may have the opportunity to discover in your own way, in a way that's true and unique and personal to you, whether there's something to this conjecture that we have shared today. And I'm so grateful to have this chance to walk and think and dream and reflect upon the beauty of the world that we live in, the profundity of the nature of light and time and reflections and spirits and hearts and minds. Bye-bye for now.